Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to a wonderful Sunday evening with myself and some friends that we've made through the journey. And we're happy to have our friends through the journey because this is what this meeting is all about. How do we get to the same destination? And how do we get there together? So we normally view this club almost like baking a cake where individuals bring something to the table. For example, one person has the flour, the other person has the sugar, someone might have a mixer. I don't know if you ever had a potluck experience, but that's pretty much what's going on here in our club. And we talk about it often enough so that everyone can try to understand exactly what it means in order to be at that same destination and know exactly the ideas that would have gotten us there into having the financial future that all of us desire. And so that's what we're going to talk about today a little bit. One of the questions that was posed just before we started was, now that we have the club and you want to execute on a deal, how do you go about it, right? And I'll share a story. We have Tori Minster on the call with us this evening, and she had contacted my broker this week, Frank Scanavino from the SBA, and asked him some questions on, funding deals, particularly in the Virgin Islands. However, the SBA doesn't have a plan to fund those deals, but her idea was, let me see if we can do a bed and breakfast in the Virgin Islands. However, Frank mentioned to her, if you can get that idea on the mainland, then that can be a whole different story. So in talking to Tori just before we started the recording, I'll go over what that scenario looks like so that anyone who's listening, you can actually do the very same thing Tori is doing, whether you have money or not. And that's what this and these meetings are all about. How do you tap into other networks that can move the ball forward for yourself? So let's discuss it in a nutshell. What I mentioned to Tori was that if you have a bed and breakfast and it's on the mainland United States and you want to do an acquisition in that space, most of the times the individuals within that business space don't have the assets in order to scale their business. And that's where we come in. So if Tori, whom I can say that I admire her spirits in that she went out and took the initiative to locate a bed and breakfast owner in the Virgin Islands. However, she can take that very same energy and locate owners right here on the mainland United States who need to scale their business. And if she can bring those deals to the table, then guess what? She gets an equity stake in the business for bringing it. But at the same token, we then get to use our capital and allow owners to scale using the SBA 7A program here in the United States. And I've mentioned it before that the SBA 7A is one of the best products in order to scale your business right here in the US. So how would that work? Tori would find the owners. We would then hop on a call together with the owners to see if they have interest in scaling their businesses. If they do have interest in scaling their business, we then connect them to Frank Scanavino, which is a business packaging company and I think its company is called IMO, International Marketing Organization. And what he does is he takes their information and do a complete due diligence on them and package their deals for different banks. So he has about maybe 20 to 30 banks under his portfolio, to whereby he introduces the deals to those banks. Those banks then come back and say yes or no. Right now, before they say yes or no, granted, if you don't have a business plan, obviously Frank would introduce you to his business plan writer, and the fee structure goes something like this. I think it's $2,500 for packaging the deal, $2,500 for the business plan writing, and then you go through the process of getting approved. Upon getting approval, that's where we step in now with the down payment or the bridge funding capital in order for you to get 100% funding as your partner. We then step in with an equity position. However, that equity position have certain legalities that have to be met with a law firm. And that law firm then would perfect the documentation and the papers moving in that direction. And after they perfect the papers, now we go through the approval process with the SBA. The SBA plus whichever bank joins in partnership to fund your deal then says yes. After they say yes, we go to closing on your deal. And then once we close, the funding sources of your business plan then takes hold in what you were doing, meaning if it's for a merger and acquisition, if it's for an expansion, if it's for whatever you needed the monies for, you would then get the monies to do what you need to do. And hence, along with us as your partner. And there again, seeing that Tory brought the deal and that company should be looking at scaling, then Tory then would move on to the next deal so that we can do another mergers and acquisition using the very same metrics for the next cycle. So, and if we can do 100 of those deals in a matter of 3 to 4 years, imagine the scalability of the working capital and the cash flows at that particular juncture. So you don't have to have money in order to get in the space of the business that you want to operate. You simply have to bring all the parties together so that they can get funded to move on to the next level. So you have great managers and you have great funding sources, and you put them all together. And now that's a recipe in order to take you from point A to point B as it relates to any company looking to really scale. And that's one of our angles here for introducing this concept to multiple people. And yes, we normally talk about real estate from its different viewpoints and its different focal points. This is another aspect of real estate from a different perspective, meaning most of these companies are going to have real estate associated with them. So there again, and that's also going to be part of the expansion. So with that said, you now have an entry point as to getting into not only residential commercial, but also commercial real estate. Because most businesses would either have their assets compiled together within their real estate structure, and whether that's under one corporations or whether that's separated out from the practice itself, it's extremely doable in terms of making certain that they have the money to move forward. And that's it in a nutshell, right? Now, the question also that Tori brought on the table is, she said, since you're so busy, after we get them on the horn and we move to that next level, how can, and I hadn't told her this yet, but this is how you hit financial freedom, primarily because every time you do one of these deals, you're immersing yourself into the company's procedures, the company's due diligence, the company's finances, And that's going to give you a better edge on the next acquisition. Because once you do one, you can actually go to the next one with a very strong position and say, look, this is what we're doing for this bed and breakfast. And instead of going solo in this particular business, why don't you decide to join us and merge up as we all grow together, wanting to get to the same destination? The goal is you prefer to have 1% of, you prefer to have 100% of $1 million with headaches and everything else, or do you prefer 1% of $1 billion? Yeah, I can let that resonate for a while. 100% of $1 million or 1% of $1 billion. And that's exactly the thought process, because at some point in our lives, we're going to have to realize that there are systems and functionalities out there that can support a growth metrics whereby we can't organically do it ourselves. And to be honest with you, that's one of the traps within business. You can start a business today, and if it's only you and maybe 2 others in that business, you could stay in that business and not make it for at least another 15 to 20 years. And sometimes most individuals within the business world don't have like a business checklist to say, you know what, I need to do this year, this the second year. I need to raise money for my business. Maybe the business is positive, flowing cash wise in a great space. But one of the evolution of business and the connectivity to real estate is that as you grow the business, you know, I would tell any business owner, the checklist for me would be very simple. You do mergers and acquisitions in order to scale the cash flow. You actually need to have partners on your business side for your accounts receivable. So when your cash flow go negative, you have a funding partner there for the accounts receivable to pick up that level of working capital that's negative. In addition to that, each company needs to raise capital like there's nobody's business, meaning every business in America should actually have a private placement memorandum as a debt instrument. And what I mean by that is there are individuals who would invest in debt on a business, say to the tune of 8, 9, or even 10 percentage points, and bring you money. Now, as an operator within a business, if you are able to have a return on that money, let's say 20 to 25 or even 30% internal rate of return, guess what? The difference is the company to keep. So at the end of the day, having a bond and raising capital through that mechanism provides you with an additional cash flow to constantly do mergers and acquisitions, but it also allows you to constantly turn over other people's money for a profit, and you share that profit with them, giving them an interest plus principal back right out of your own business. Now, you get to a large enough state, now you can ask for private equity to join you and allow them to participate in your exit strategy, whether that's being an exit to the IPO world or an exit strategy going to the SPAC. Those are some of the checklists that should be on every business. And that's just off the top of my head. We could go on and on about some of the specifics on how to walk away out of that business later on as it relates to you having a life insurance policy paid for by the company so that it builds up over time. That gives you a cash value that either the business can borrow from for later on, or you can borrow from for later on for future expansions. And it's ideas like that that makes this space so wonderful. Now, the list of that criteria happens in the aftermath after you get funded. but in the most reasonable state of any business. And we'll be talking about some of these things as we move through the space, even with our own acquisitions. I constantly share the radiology acquisition business that Warren Thomas and I have partnered in to take that company over. Last week, we just celebrated our first payroll going out. So first payroll going out is, we're not through the woods yet, but those businesses in that space can do anywhere from $100,000 a month on upward of up to $1 million a month, right? And this idea of scaling a business is no different than how we want to scale our own works, so that we can invest more of the difference of the money in either real estate or the different sectors within your portfolio. And that's the secret. You know, it's work, yes. Is it a lot of headache? Yes. Is it mind-boggling? Yes. However, you don't have to do it alone. You break it up into different components, and you allow some of the partners to take on some of the heavy lifting. And that's why this is more of a collaborative effort for us all. So there again, we're not only talking about businesses, we're talking about how individuals in the group get ahead. And Tori is not the only one. So kudos to you, Tori, for at least taking the initiative this week and at least looking for a deal and connecting with real people that can move your ideas along. One of the next individuals in the group, I don't think he's here tonight, but Whitney Johnson had found a single family home in his neck of the woods. And so he brought that to my attention this week. And what I told him, I'll take a look at it this week and see if we can do an evaluation on it to see how we can move on that front for an acquisition. And with that said, I think, you know, that's how we're going to move the ball forward. Because here it is, we have John Lynn, that's a specialist in our neck of the woods. And it's a no-brainer to say, hey, John, we have this property. Why not we all do a partnership on this and see how we can get it to where it needs to be? Take advantage of the individuals in the group that have the specialties that, that you can leverage. And you don't have to be the specialist yourself. Just simply bring the deal. And we can spend some time on Fridays in order to collaborate or cross-reference connecting with the owner. Yeah, and that's how it goes. Oh, I see. I have a little one knocking at the door. So that's it in a nutshell for us today as it relates to moving the ball forward. We all want to help. And as we help one another out through each step and each stage of their own development, I think Steve Harvey said it best in an interview this week or last week with the Earn Your Leisure guys. He said, you help enough people get what they want, you'll eventually get what you want. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We help enough people get what they want, we'll eventually get to the stage whereby we help ourselves in getting to the very same destination. So I'll open it up, and it could be Q&A for anyone who wants to speak up. So John, we'll start with you, since you're a little silent there on the end. What are your thoughts? And you know, how do you see, as a question, how do you see something like this playing into your portfolio?
Well, as soon as I finish what I'm doing now, which is restructuring, because I'm very heavy real estate wise, I would like to learn a little bit more about the business acquisition side that you were discussing. Specifically, I don't know, what would be the business I would look into yet, but I would like to learn exactly. I have a lot of questions, but I think what would be better for me is rather than on that section, rather than ask the questions, wait until after you guys are finishing a deal, and maybe you could bring it to the group for what you did, so I could understand the moving parts for who did what.
Okay.
Because the business side that you're talking about is something that I'm sorely lacking in, and what I'm looking to learn more about. Specifically, what you're talking about. The closest I came was possibly looking into that small motel that never came to fruition because I couldn't get to it in time. But I would like to see how a deal is done. Like, I mean, obviously after you've already executed it, so there's no competition or issues on your side, and you feel comfortable. But I'd like to see, as you go along, the steps that are involved and what each person took, what the stake was. For example, if you're funding through the SBA, are you also providing funding or just management from your side, Devaughn?
That's a very good question. Now, for the acquisitions that we do, the radiology business, we acquired that without SBA funding.
Okay.
Right. However, that does not mean that we have eliminated SBA funding. We are going to use SBA funding in that business, mind you. And the SBA funding for that particular business is going to be a recapitalization or restructuring of the financial positions within that business. All right, so that's what we'll use the SBA funding for. Buying a business in the US, you only need a couple of things, really. We found, for that particular business, we found an accounts receivable partner that brought $4 million to the table, and we leverage the $4 million that he brought to the table as a buyout for the business itself.
So did you buy 100%?
We bought 100% of the business.
Okay, and is that bought as a company or a conglomerate? How's it?
That's bought as a company. Okay. So the goal for that particular business is we would buy out that business, turn the business around, start producing $600,000 to $900,000 a month in revenue. But even before we get there, even during the turnaround process, we would now have the option to call up Frank and say, Frank, we now have a business that have a history of 12 years of operation. They have done anywhere from $1 million to $5 million over the last 3 years. And now we're looking for SBA funding in order for this business, for us to recapitalize this business. Well, Frank is going to say, okay, Devaughn, let me package the deal for you. Do you have your down payment? And I'm going to say, yes, we do. We have 10%, and we're looking for about $2 million from the SBA in order to continue the turnaround for this business, which includes working capital, inventory, equipment, and if push come to shove, real estate. All right. So with that said, it makes sense now for us to leverage the SBA that way. So some people get into business acquisition with the SBA. Some people do the acquisition first and then bring the SBA to the table. And that's a good way to do it. Either way is great. It depends on your plan. But there again, once you have a $2 million note over your head, I don't know how many of you can sleep at night with a $2 million note over your head, but let me tell you, it's a little jarring, right? However, it doesn't have to be, right? Because with a very solid plan, part of that $2 million is going to be, I'm certain of it, another acquisition of another company that's producing probably $1 million, right? So we stack every debt level that we go through, we stack it onto the original business. And that business then, once we acquire it, should have the effect of cost reduction, because we don't need 2 billers in the same company. We don't need 2 social media groups. We don't need, that there's a duplication within businesses that you would not need. And for us, we wouldn't need that level of duplication as it relates to similar functions that we would have already start in one area. So that's helping on the scalability side of the acquisition. So the goal is to start accumulating each business after the next one. And over time, you now have a business, one company, doing anywhere from 10 to $20 million a month kind of thing, and growing it constantly. So that's the general synopsis of why we use the SBA. But more importantly, each functionality of business acquisition simply leads us that that's a tool that we can leverage and use. But having the best night's sleep ever, understanding that you have diversified your business so much through scaling it that it doesn't matter what the debt is, as long as the assets can pay for it. So that's, and there again, even with Tori, that's the very same ideology that we bring to the table with a bed and breakfast as well.
So if Tori goes out and she finds a bed and breakfast and she brings the deal, does she get equity? Does she get a fee? What does she get in return for putting the deal, connecting the dots?
Yeah, I would tell her she needs equity, right? So on the first one, we would negotiate some level of equity infusion for her, primarily because if she can get an additional business on top of this one and keep scaling, at some point, these businesses with their turnaround and their cash flow, they have to write a check to Tori.
Right. So what kind of percentage equity would she look to?
Somewhere between 2% and 3% initially. She get to 10 of them and stacking them. Now you're looking at anywhere from 5 to 10 percentage points.
Now, as part of that, does she go in rolled it? Is she as an investor percentage, or does she get rolled into ownership as part of the LLC or INC?
Well, you got to be careful with ownership, right? Primarily because ownership comes with a certain level of liability. Right. Meaning, I wouldn't want, if any of these companies get sued, I wouldn't want Tori's name to be mixed up in a lawsuit whatsoever. So just like myself, when we take a stake in the business, that's only an initial stake so that we can get funded by the SBA. Now, once they get funded by the SBA in the transition, we will move from an equity position to what's called a warrant position, which equates to the same equity share status, but we're not tied to any liability that the company may have.
So it would essentially be non-participating stock type of ownership.
Well, it'll be non-participating stock ownership, yes. However, anything we do from moving forward with additional mergers and acquisitions or additional services, then that requires a fee, right? So that's where we'll have additional fees on the back half as we move forward in the space.
But would it make sense for Tori to have an LLC?
Oh yeah.
In order for her to
beyond
her liability.
Yeah, she have to have an LLC, right? For the limited liability, and that LLC would probably be wrapped up in a joint venture with us, right? So she is not forgotten or mistaken. In this financial industry, I found it to be there are crooks everywhere, and I ran into most of them. A lot of the bad people, they simply want to do. They want you to take their word for it. In this profession, you really need to have all your paperwork documented so that you don't have a problem when it's your time to speak up for yourself. And those things should be discussed initially and upfront and as openly honest as possible. Granted, yes, and it's no different, John, that if, and we're missing one person tonight. I don't know if she showed up, but Dr. Jackson, are you here? Let me see if she's on. No, I don't see her. But Dr. Jackson is one of the individuals who came to me and she said, you know what, Devaughn, I want to start investing. And I'm like, okay, great. We have a club that meet every Sunday night. Why don't you bring your checkbook and let's roll from there? And she's amenable to bringing a checkbook to the table, right? So between her checkbook, my checkbook, Warren Thomas checkbook, between the three of us, we should now have somewhere north of $400,000.
Can I just ask a quick question too? And I don't want to take up too much more time, but basically the business aspect that you're providing is similar to the Burr method. If
Yep.
you're familiar with, it's basically, for those of you not familiar, the Burr method is basically where you buy, even with hard money, you renovate or remodel, and then you rent, and then you refinance it with a standard loan. And the equity of your 20% down came from the remodel. And then you pay off the hard money lender sooner than later to reduce the interest. You now have a low interest loan plus additional money to go and do your next renovation the same way until you can self-finance. And eventually you get yourself into multiple owned properties with very low interest loans. And then eventually you convert, when you reach your number, you either keep going or you convert the rent equity into early payoffs and you end up with a boatload of real estate.
Correct.
So that you're looking for private money from your private investor, and then you're looking for the SBA money to be your refi.
Correct.
Low interest, and also provide equity to do your next project. So I get the concept. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So within this way, we should never run out of money, period. And we always have a funding source.
Do you vet the businesses before you introduce them? Like, is it your guys in Las Vegas, the guy there, or is it?
That's the beauty of this. I don't have to vet the business at all, right? Because the SBA is going to do their own level of vetting. Okay, I simply need a copy of the documentation. So, so when Frank asks them for their bank records and their social security and their business tax records and their individual tax records, I don't need to vet anymore after that, because those are the same documentation that the SBA is going to look at, and they're going to say, all right, we believe this guy is fit. We're going to approve him for, let's say, $1 million. That's good enough for me, right? And it's good enough for me primarily because they've already been scrutinized by not only the bank, not only the SBA, but Frank process as well.
So the underwriting basically supports.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So it becomes easy to now partner with those individuals. And the funny thing is, how we structure our deals, we make sure that our down payment is within the lowest possible risk of not being eroded. So our relationship is make certain that our money, which is the down payment money, goes directly to the bank itself. It doesn't go through the hands of the owners at all.
Okay, but what if the owners have the stake in the company? Do they maintain controlling interest for example, in their bed and breakfast?
Yeah, they maintain.
Who gets the check from the SBA as the money? Does it go directly to the business as a draw?
Yeah, they get the money as a draw.
So then how does your investment or Tory, other than equity play, how do they get any benefit from that loan to use in future projects?
Easy. There's enough capitalization in the working capital, plus the added check that I bring to the table to do deal number 2.
Right. But I mean, once that company borrows money, you mentioned that debt equity would help towards a future.
Yes.
If the bed and breakfast people have controlling interest.
Yes.
And you're a funding partner and they draw the money, how do you get access to that money towards your next venture?
That's going to be within the contract that's specifically perfected by the law firm. So at some point, they're going to have to return the level of investment that we brought to the table on a one-to-one basis.
Right.
And that's a short-term bridge. So they're going to have to return that shortly after they get funded. That's why.
Are there points or interest, or is that equity?
No points, no interest whatsoever. However, there's an origination fee that's charged for the money that's used.
And then what kind of equity would your company take for bridging the loan?
10%. But that 10%, there again, that's only a short-term equity hold. Because after they get funded, we then go to a warrant position.
Okay, so it's kind of like a perpetuity silent partnership.
Right.
Okay.
So,
and Tori, last question: are you just looking for real estate / bed and breakfast type businesses, or any business?
Just real estate, bed and breakfast for now.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Tori, you're up.
I wasn't sure. Were you answering the questions in the chat when you were talking about the accounts receivable and all that jargon?
Okay. Let me see what the question was. Okay, I don't see the questions in the chat.
Oh.
All right, so let me go ahead and answer that question for you. The accounts receivable, how that works. Sometimes on some of these businesses, they normally have accounts receivable that, so for example, they take on a client, but the client doesn't have to pay them for at least 30 or 60 days. That's an account receivable. So an accounts receivable lender now goes in and say, you know what, for that client who is not paying you 30 or 60 days, I want to buy that contract from you for a discount. Right? So they would then bring monies to the table. So let's say John connects or buys from you Tori's consultancy services. And John owes you now $1,000, and you have agreed with John to pay that back over the next 60 days. John's happy because he's keeping his cash. You're happy because at the end of the day, you know within 30 or 60 days, you're going to get $1,000 back, which can be booked as part of your sales. On top of that, a company now walks in and say, look, Tori, I'm willing to give you $950 in exchange for that $1,000 today. And we want the other $50 from John later on when it becomes payable or something along those lines. So what they're doing is giving you cash now for a discount for some minimum fee. And to you, you're happy for the $950 primarily because it now increases your cash flow. That very same idea is used when purchasing a business as well. Right? So give you an example there, using the very same numbers. You want to sell your business for $5,000. We look at your accounts receivable, it's showing $1,000. We say, well, Tori, we know that your company is about to collect $1,000 from John in the near future. We will give you 80% of that today, which is $800. And for the difference from the $5,000 of your buyout, we want you to participate in the business that do an earnout over the next 2 years where you collect the difference out of the working capital within the business. So those deals go on all the time, and that's how you buy businesses without bringing any of your monies to the table. Now, the investor on the other side would then go to the accounts receivable lender, and he would partner with them. And of course, there's a fee in exchange for that partnership and the use of the accounts receivable money. So once you pay the fee or the VIG, in other words, now you have access to that family office or the hedge funds with those monies. And that's how you do a buyout transaction.
It seems similar to wholesaling.
Yep, very
Okay.
similar, very
Okay.
similar. I mean, John broke it down with the Burr method. It's very similar to that too, because at the end of the day, that mechanism for acquisition, you're actually only going in with that mechanism. That's not a mechanism that you want to stay in there long-term with. That's why you need other funding sources on your business, meaning the accounts receivable gets you in, but you still need to raise capital in order for growth. The only way you can outgrow your business is to constantly raise capital for it. So individuals who think that they don't have to raise capital for their business, they're mistakenly telling themselves the wrong story.
Okay. So
And
the
that-
other, okay.
And that's what you bring to the table as well too, right? Because after you go and you negotiate with the bed and breakfast, part of that is whereby we bring all the capital they need constantly for their expansion. So you're going to be in a long relationship with them. And I'll connect you to those capital partners as well, in terms of setting up the private placements and the documentation needed. But all of that's going to be contractual upon signing with us. So they're going to be well versed in the idea that they're going to need capital, and we want to be the ones supplying it for them.
Okay. Are you still not able to see the chat box?
Okay. I saw something in there earlier that says you can start looking at owners in Atlanta and West Palm Beach. Should I tell them about the SBA? Sure. And yep.
On the first call?
Also, yep, you can tell them on the first call. A call like that would be, hi, Mr. Bed and Breakfast owner. My name is Tori Minster. I'm interested in helping you scale your business. Do you have 1 unit, and would you like to own 100? And then you let them speak from there. They'll tell you all about their business after that. The goal then is to mention, because they're gonna be curious as to what are you talking about and because they couldn't scale their business over the life that they've owned it. How can you do something like that? And at that point, you can talk to them about the SBA, and you can talk to them about me as an investor as well too. And the more you get to know this group and what our story is, the easier it is to sell. Because there again, even though we would have done the $5 million acquisition in the radiology space, it's no different in the bed and breakfast space either. The same procedures. We can actually use the very same accounts receivable lender. There's some components that are just the same. So once you share that story with them, that we've already taken over a medical business in the space and would like to do the very same thing in the bed and breakfast space with them as our partner, that may be of interest. And you can certainly schedule a call with me and them using my Calendly link. I'll give you the Calendly link whenever you're ready, and just schedule them on the call.
Okay. And then is there a list of criteria we should look out for the bed and breakfast? I just won't be.
The bed and breakfast criteria is anywhere from 6 to 10 units normally. Normally, those are mom and pop operations. But we're willing to, if you find a bed and breakfast with 50 units, almost like in the motel space that we could convert into an Airbnb, that can work as well too.
Okay.
All right. Mhm.
Devaughn, are you guys talking about buying the business out where you're the primary ownership, or those people are retaining ownership?
They're retaining ownership initially, right? The exit strategy is where we get it more involved with ownership, but that's after 5 or so years in terms of an exit. Meaning, we accumulate 100 of these over, let's say, 3 to 4 years time frame. The exit for us would be the IPO. And because of the warrants, we get paid outright from exercising the IPO. So we would then be paid upon the IPO.
I have another question.
Go ahead, Tori.
What's it's not really related to this, but what's the status on the that platform that
The status on the Delio Pro platform as well as the Centfuse. I have John doing a deep dive on it. We weren't able to get in touch this week about it, but I would like, you know what, hit me up on Monday, Tori, about it. What I'll do, I'll give you access to their back office, not only the platform, but you can use, there's a whole documentation flow that goes on in the back half of it. What I'd like to do is give you access to that and give you access to Delio plus Zenfuse, and you go buck wild on it. How's that?
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Mhm. All right. Whitney, how are you doing? I see you popped up.
Medium, man, I good.
Yeah. For those of you who are, an interesting question came up this week about being a foreigner with working status in the United States. It's a fallacy about you not having the right to purchase homes in the US. There's a bank called Quotic Bank, Quotic. They are a bank if you have working status, but you are not a citizen or a resident of the United States. They will still work with you in order for you to purchase a home, as long as you have the working documentation that you are legally able to work here. They will work with you to get you to where you need to be in terms of acquisitions. So for those of you who are coming over from Bahamas, Jamaica, Trinidad, but you don't have the citizenship or the residency, that's another way for you to have ownership still within the United States.
Oh.
All right, next up, Catherine. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing well.
Good.
Thanks for asking.
Good.
Again, I'm just in listening mode, Devaughn. A lot of information.
Okay.
And
Well,
yeah,
the information is great. We're trying to get you paid. How's that?
yes, I understand.
Okay. So there again, in your neck of the woods, even if you want to give Tori a call and say, Tori, I like the bed and breakfast idea. Let's see if we can close some of the companies in our own neck of the woods. You know, and you know what, that platform that we talked about, you know, I'll share the access out to that a little bit more, but let Tori work through that first without any incumbents, and then let her tell us how she like it, how she dislike it, how easy it is, how difficult it is, and then we can go from there. All right. we have a newcomer tonight, Mal. Welcome to the club, Mal. Unmute yourself.
Hi, Sir D.
Oh, that's Maldini.
Yes, Sir D.
It's been a while. Maldini is one of the accountants who work for me. So he slipped in underneath Mal tonight. So Maldini was looking at a 4-unit complex in the Brevard community area. And I guess once I find time to sit down with him to actually analyze it, it should be interesting in order to do an acquisition in that spot. But it's a 4-unit. I think they're asking $399 for it. We'd certainly take a look under the hood to see if it's worth buying. So thank you so much, Maldini, for coming on tonight. And I want to thank all of you. You know, the whole idea is that we all want to be at the same destination. And if we all can be at the same destination together, then there's no reason why this thing can't work. Meaning, we do an acquisition even in that space. First phone call I'm going to say, hey, John, what do you think about this? You know, or Tori, this is something that we're looking at. How these numbers look to you, and do you think, what are your thoughts in terms of moving the needle forward? So as we move through the space, you know, that's the relationship that I would like to see develop in the club, in that we all get an opportunity to leverage one another's strengths, right? I didn't say weaknesses, strengths. So if you're a better communicator, see, Maldini he can't talk to people for Christ, right? He's one of the worst people, and fear of talking to people is just not in his portfolio. However, the man is really, really good at working my QuickBooks systems and he does all of the corporations that we manage on a monthly basis. But you can't touch him when it comes to journalizing bank statements or reconciling checkbooks and credit cards and the likes thereof. And there's value there, right? So I would not dare throw him into a mixture to communicate with individuals when that's not his strong suit. You know, so the goal is to take what we all have in terms of our strengths and just build around that constantly and keep everyone in a certain lane to say, you know what, you know, I would hate to realize that it's extremely lonely to the top because when you get there, you don't have anybody to talk to. Right. And I see life going that way primarily because that America is a litigious society. But at the end of the day, if you create a certain level of communication with a close-knit individuals, then the journey becomes a lot easier.
I'm working on it, Sir D. Just a quick question for you or John.
Go ahead, Maldini.
Foreclosed properties. Is that easier way to finance a property?
Foreclosed property?
Yeah. Should I be focused on looking at foreclosed properties, or should I just look at properties in general?
I'll reserve my answer. I'll let John go first. John?
Okay, I have bought a foreclosure in the past, and I can tell you that there are more hoops to jump through. The first thing is most foreclosures are sold as is, which means it may or may not require some inspections. And are you using a traditional lender, or are you using hard money, or an investor? Who's investing the money?
You'll probably use my money in order to buy it. That's what it is.
So that's going to be the primary person right there for requirements, what the lender is going to require for it. With foreclosures, it may take longer, and it may be a closing by mail because it's usually represented. If it's REO, it's usually, which is bank owned or real estate owned property, which is what REO stands for. You might be dealing with an attorney or some kind of firm that's handling the sale. So it might be a closing by mail where they literally have to mail the keys. But the other thing is, depending on the property, it may have been rented, it may have been sitting, it may have damage. You're taking an as-is property. So you have to check with the lender on what their requirements are for that. And then also it has to be approved by the bank or the company that's sourcing it for the bank, who's selling it on the foreclosed end. So it takes extra time, but I have traditionally mortgaged through a standard mortgage, but ironically, in my deal, everything went right except the appraiser didn't fill out the paperwork properly. And the bank got stuck, the funding company for the mortgage got stuck holding the loan. They couldn't sell it to Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac because it wasn't conforming. But ironically, I'd used them multiple times and I paid the loan off early. So we all won. So to answer your question, it's going to take more time. It's going to take usually moving parts. So the company, the bank, or the attorney representing the foreclosure is going to have to handle everything and or get approval from the bank. Number two, your lender may have extra requirements like only 75% instead of 80% on a standard loan, or needs to have a home inspection report, or needs to have especially a mortgage report with a questionnaire if it deals with an HOA or a townhome or a condominium association. They may require extra things. And then, as I said, the time will take longer on it. And then lastly, the condition may be something that's in much worse condition than you anticipate because it's been either neglected or used.
Got it. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I like the notion that it doesn't matter which vehicle of real estate it comes through the door on. It doesn't matter the hoops that you have to jump through. An acquisition is an acquisition. And as long as the numbers make sense, I would say go ahead and do it. So don't worry too much about the headaches involved. You're going to have headaches no matter what. Getting it to the stage whereby you need it to be profitable for yourself is the whole idea. So I wouldn't get too bogged down into the minutia of things. Good deal is a good deal.
That is certainly.
All right. All right. Are there any other questions that we can talk about tonight? Otherwise, I'm going to close it out here. Did we get to everybody? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all once again for coming. Let's make this thing a reality so that our 2022 can be the most outstanding year for each and every one of us. And it doesn't matter what space you're in. Let's all do it together. Thank you, guys. And I'd see you next week.
Have a good night.
All right, John, Tori,
Thank you.
Catherine.
Good night.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. Maldini, thank you. Whitney, thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
All right, night, night.